And to be honest, mental health 7.5 years ago to now, it's vastly different, right? 7.5 years ago, you weren't guaranteed that you were going to be able to grow.
Do you think it's because of the pandemic?
100%. And so at the beginning, there was a bit of like, what are we going to do, right? We're not going to be able to provide services. This world opened up about virtual care. We definitely saw a spike in working professional, having to do their role, their work in the same environment as their kids who are doing school.
Had about 5 or 6 kids we'd see that the parents are just neglecting them. And it was because all the kid wanted to do was, well, he's acting out. Like, he's acting out because you're not showing him any human emotion.
There is a difference in how people search mental health in Toronto versus Vaughan, which is really interesting to us. We didn't anticipate that.
Yeah.
So, for example, in Etobicoke,
oh, my head is hurting. What do I do?
Listen.
That's my Italian. I'm not very good at. I'm not very good at being
best
Italian.
That you're Italian.
Yeah. Welcome everybody. It's David Cinelli here with another episode of DC Talks. Again, with your host, David Cinelli. This is episode 86. And today we have a really special treat. We got my good buddy, Ed Roldan here. So Ed and I have known each other, we're just saying off camera, for like 28 years.
28 years.
Yeah. So Ed used to go to high school with my wife back in the Power days, for Michael Power, Trojans, playing at St. Mike's.
That's right.
It's been that long, eh?
Heated things, but back in the day.
I don't feel that old, eh? Like,
some days.
Some days when your back is cracking.
For sure. But thank you for having me today.
Yeah, you're welcome. So Ed's been a long journey, believe it or not. So Ed and I saw you again when I was dating my ex. I think it was like 2005, 2006, and you were working at Al Palladini's.
Yeah.
And what were you doing there?
Well, I was working with youth in Parks and Rec for City of Vaughan. And what happened to see you when you were going to the gym at Al Palladini's. So.
Yeah, but the very brief time I lived at my parents' house in Woodbridge, and then that was the gym of choice to go there until Natalie and I got back together. We moved to Etobicoke, and then But that was so funny. I was running into you there. I hadn't seen you at that point, in 10 years.
10 years, yeah.
And now you're back to Etobicoke.
Back to Etobicoke.
Love it. So a little bit about Ed's journey. Let's find out here. So Ed, what is it you do? Like, what is the name of your company? And I know his sister Alma was also supposed to be here. I love your family. I think all your family is amazing, but you and Alma are also clients of mine too. Very good friends of mine. But so what did you and Alma start?
Sure. Yeah. So Alma and I are the directors of a mental health clinic in Etobicoke called Etobicoke Psychological Services. We started about 7.5 years ago. And we've now branched off. We have an office in Vaughan as well, but we're a mental health clinic called Etobicoke Psychological Services. Sometimes we're also in Vaughan. We're known as EPS Family Health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, EPS again. That makes sense. Right. So how did this all start? Because you didn't, first what I've known, you didn't start in this kind of field.
No.
As we just talked about, you're at the gym for the next thing I know, you're doing this.
Well, listen, I think, the one thing that's really interesting about my sister and myself is that our journey to become clinical psychologists wasn't a straight line. We actually took, similar but very divergent paths to get to where we're at. So we both went into university, and I went to U of T with Nat at the beginning, and so we first went in thinking we were going to go to med school. Our father is a psychiatrist. He just retired a year ago, and we had anticipated we were going to go to med school, and then U of T just knocks you down, right? And so in many ways,
did you guys have classes like 1,600 people, one class, people outside?
Yeah, like speakers? Writing on my lap in Con Hall, and like there's nothing to write on, that type of stuff. It was a disaster, and so we ended up graduating with degrees. She's 2 years older than me. We graduated with degrees in biology, each of us, and we did nothing in that field. She went on to do a master's in pharmacology, and I went to work at a law firm doing like filing. And one day I decided to go back to summer school, and I took a psychology summer school program, and it just opened my eyes. Like, it was like, wow, this is what I love. And so that started my journey into psychology. And then I told my sister, and she followed my footsteps to go then to get a degree in psychology. And then we then got PhDs, and we decided to open up our clinic 7.5 years ago because we wanted to become a hub of mental health here in Etobicoke.
So how did that, how long is that journey to get your PhD? So if I'm wanted to get into your field, say that's exactly what I wanted to do. What are the steps? You need any form of undergrad, like for a master's in business, you just need some sort of undergrad. What do you need to become a clinical psychologist?
My understanding is that you would need an undergrad in psychology. So you would need an undergrad in psychology. You would need to have at least some courses in psychology, because later on when you register with the college, they will look for that you check off some boxes of having some undergrad courses. You can become you can provide psychological services in Ontario with a master's or a PhD. Okay, so if you wanted to go the fastest route to work as a psychologist or to provide psychological services, to get a master's in psychology. My sister and I both went on to do our PhDs as well.
Mm-hmm. So for masters, is it like, where do you get your masters? Is it like a college? Is it a university? How does that work?
Yeah. So once you get your undergrad, you then apply to masters in psychology, which there are a variety of programs in Ontario. It's quite competitive to get into it, especially like if you were to look at when I applied for my master's versus applying for masters now, I wouldn't get into any grad school now. Yeah. When we're looking at like resumes of people who are getting into master's programs now, they have publications, they have a variety of experiences. It is quite competitive. And so you apply to get your master's and there are a variety of programs in Ontario that are available.
It's so funny how that worked, right? Like when I applied I did my master's, started in 2003. It was a 1-year program. 2004 it was like, it was very small. Like not everybody had their master's. It was more of a niche kind of thing. And now it turned around, people, the same job, the entry to get into an entry level position. Now you need an MBA, you need some sort of master's, and it can
feel overwhelming, right?
Yeah,
100%.
So then, okay, so you both get around the same time to graduate?
Yeah. So we ended up getting into grad school at the same time. And we started together.
Oh,
we started at different schools. So she went to Windsor, and I went to Lakehead, Thunder Bay.
Oh.
Never been to Thunder Bay.
Holy shit.
So I fly up to Thunder Bay. I remember flying in. I'm like, where am I? Right. And so here I am. I had an amazing experience. She went to Windsor. We started at the same time. She ended up graduating a year ahead of me because I didn't finish my dissertation until after I had started work. Right. And so we had started around the same time, her about a year ahead of me. And we both started working in separate locations. I started working in the school system. So I was in the school system for 10 years. She was working in private practice. And then after about 3 or 4 years, we wanted to open up our own place. And that's where we came into, the original plan was that we were going to open a mental health clinic with our father as well as part of the picture. Yeah. In the end, he was closer to retirement age, and so that didn't happen. But that's where we got the idea to start a clinic, and we're both from Etobicoke, so that's why Etobicoke Psychological.
So then you decided to do that. What are the challenges? So for any entrepreneur, because you really had the job, and now you are working, and you decide, this is why I like this podcast. I want to talk about different people, different avenues, how to become an entrepreneur, because you pretty much had a job, you're working on that, and then you decided to become an entrepreneur. What were the challenges that came along with that? Because there are definite challenges.
Well, yeah. And then I will say that one thing that my sister and I both are, I would say we're pretty conservative. And so at the beginning, I didn't leave my job. So I started as part-time. I went from full-time at the board. I went to part-time to have a bit of a safety net. And so then that's when we opened the business. She was still working at another clinic. And so, and you didn't help us with our first clinic. But which was much improved.
Guys, the first clinic, this was hilarious. I walk in, he's like, and obviously I walk in when you hear this music. Remember that?
Yes.
I'm like,
yes.
So you guys are trying to, so they were having drum beats in
Yes.
the basement.
Yes.
And this was like, and I'm like, how often does this happen? You're like, what, 2 or 3 times a week or
Well,
something?
it used to happen on Wednesday evening, so we couldn't have clients on Wednesday evenings, so there was drumming. And then it would happen when one of the things that we do is do assessments for children, learning, ADHD, that type of stuff. And there was drumming on weekends.
To do that with a kid having ADHD. Here it is.
You're trying to do a memory test, right? You're trying to do memory test, and you hear drumming. That's overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
And so our first clinic, the one thing that we did do, the one positive about the first clinic is that it was very small. And so we kept our overhead very low at the beginning because we weren't sure. And to be honest, mental health 7.5 years ago to now, it's vastly different, right? 7.5 years ago, you weren't guaranteed that you were going to be able to grow, that you were going to get business. And so we started very conservatively and had other jobs and other means and we kept our overhead really low at that point.
Do you think it's because of the pandemic?
100%. When the pandemic hit, there was a point at which we were in a bit of a panic because we're like, what are we going to do if we can't provide services? And pre-pandemic, it was actually pretty rare. There were some clinics that did provide virtual care, but it was not a common sort of practice in psychology. And so at the beginning, there was a bit of like, what are we going to do, right? We're not going to be able to provide services. And then this world opened up about virtual care. And virtual care, I have to say, in the literature suggests that virtual care can be as effective as in-person care. And at the same time, it also opens the door to people who would never have considered coming into a clinic. All of a sudden, they're doing during their lunch periods, during their breaks. They can do it from, the parked car, not driving, that type of stuff. And so all of a sudden, we actually got inundated with demand. Demand went partly because people were trapped in their own homes, and in many ways there was a lot of stress and juggling two roles and multiple roles, but also just access to services. And you saw that the demand increase exponentially, and we as a clinic grew.
Now, for your type of client, was it across the board for different ages, or did you find that there was a definite demographic which, especially because of the pandemic, grew much faster than other demographics?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that we definitely saw a spike in working professionals, right? People who were juggling sort of parenthood and having to do their role, their work in the same, environment as their kids who are doing school. I think that we saw a definite spike in that sort of request from young professionals and parents. Yeah. I would say that was probably the biggest sort of jump that we saw.
And are you still seeing that trend continue today? Like, if you compare, like, say 2021, because right there we've been in the middle of the pandemic, to current situation, I would say that the other thing that's really changed is, I think, and I have seen you talk about this in some ways, is that I think we're more likely to talk about mental health in general, right? And just a general, and I'm a big proponent of that. This idea that one of the things that I think we really work on at the clinic is to normalize human experience. And human experience is about struggle. It's about pain. It's about difficult moments, right? And so one of the things that as we start to increase our ability to talk about those things openly, without shame, without embarrassment, I think it makes it more likely that people will seek out mental health supports. And so in terms of trends, I will say that we're starting to see a return back to people requesting a bit more of in-person. But I do say that it's actually, I can't tell you how often we will get a sort of request from people who have never accessed mental health supports. And I think that reflects just society in that we're talking about mental health much more. Oh, absolutely. I think that shift really does help. And I think we talk about this a lot on the show too, because, unfortunately we've had friends commit suicide because they had nowhere to turn. And we're just like, guys, either get a group, talk to somebody, talk to a professional, do something before you get to that point, because doing it on your own, especially as men,
100%, especially as men, as a Latino man myself, like culturally, I'm not supposed to sort of show emotions. I'm not just supposed to show weakness.
Unless it's anger. We're allowed to show anger.
Anger, that's right. But even anger, but here, this is that's a great point. And I think one of the things that we work on when we work with clients is any emotion you experience is adaptive. So as human beings, we have those emotions, whether it's anger, because there's a need that needs to be met. And so if I'm angry, we often, I'm looking to set boundaries. I'm looking to enact change. I'm looking to say, no, you've crossed a boundary. And yet as a society, when we see angry, we teach that it's inappropriate and that we shouldn't be angry. And what we try to work on in therapy is to acknowledge that it's okay to be angry because you're human. It is about tweaking your behaviors so that you don't get in trouble or you get your point across more effectively. And I think that's something that has been a big sort of shift in general, is the idea that we're really trying to working on validating those experiences and again those challenges that people experience, right?
Yeah, I also find your approach is more talking and working things out as opposed to just prescribing drugs.
Yeah.
Like, what is your thoughts on that? I know I didn't ask that question beforehand, but I thought as we're talking about this, I remember being in the States.
Yeah.
And we clearly had some coaching. So I used to coach in the summer times at our University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point. Actually, Phil Kessel used to shoot on my goalies. He's still friends with my buddy Matt. But it was funny. We had about 5 or 6 kids we'd see that the parents are just neglecting them. Like, they're big shots. And we actually had this here at the goalie school. Like, the parents leave for 6 weeks and would buy him off with money. Like, the president of Gap at the time gave the kid a black card and he can go and buy whatever he wanted. And he was, basically bribing kids to be his friend. But you see that they're all on Ritalin at the time.
Yeah.
And it was because all the kid wanted to do is, well, he's acting out. I'm like, he's acting out because you're not showing him any human emotion.
Yeah.
Like, and that was like when us as coaches, like I was like in my 20s, it was clearly obvious to us. I'm like, this doctor should not prescribe this. And as soon as the kid had the drug, he was like, I remember this one kid, Dakota, like he would start getting a little bit antsy and then he was almost dead. Like so drugged out. It was a sad state of affairs.
Yeah, I will say that there is some science and literature to support that there are some conditions in which medication is actually the first mode of treatment, and so in some conditions, medication is absolutely necessary. Yes. Okay, things like psychosis, things like that.
These kids clearly didn't have that.
No, for sure. But I just want to preface with that. I think with something like ADHD, in my experience, because I am primarily a child and adolescent psychologist, is that I think that the one thing that the literature supports is that medication for ADHD needs to be very carefully titrated. And so you need to have a physician who is willing to start at a really low dose and sort of up it in a specific way while you're monitoring side effects. You don't want a child who's going to be over medicated, is what you described. And you also, one thing I definitely do not agree with is that medication isn't going to solve a lot of the other problems. You do have to have a human connection. You have to have boundaries and expectations and consequences. And so it's sometimes even with a child with ADHD, like there are kids, David, who no matter what, they cannot control their energy level. And they might be really motivated to be in a specific space, but they can't control their energy. They're bouncing around, they're moving around. Like I've had kids who are doing an intelligence test while spinning on a chair and they're getting everything right. In a school system, they might get in trouble because they're spinning in a chair, right? They're disrupting the class and those type of things. And so I think that there are some kids for whom medication might be appropriate, but I do think it has to be a very careful sort of process. And you have to remember that there are other strategies that you want to incorporate as well.
Oh, it's interesting you said that about the spitting and stuff. Was it a boy by chance?
Yes. Oh, yeah. 100%.
Yeah. And so, Jordan
hockey
Peterson,
player too.
Of course.
Yeah.
So Jordan Peterson is a huge proponent of saying that our school systems are failing the boys because they have so much energy. They need to be playing more. Now, I don't agree that they should be playing all the time to the point of exhaustion, but I kind of agree with him. I remember being a kid, always wanted to sit down. You just wanted to go. Do you think that also, would you agree with that assessment that boys would probably need to expel a lot more energy than we're allowing them in like an elementary school? You said, he's a smart, intelligent kid getting the answers right.
Yep.
But his energy level just needed him to expel that energy.
And there are some sort of scientific results that support that. There is literature that would suggest that, for example, that if you were to get children to do exercise at the beginning of the day, their learning is going to improve, right? So there is literature to support that. I think the reality is that, unfortunately, we have classrooms that are kind of like, what do you do when you have 30 kids, right? 30 kids in a small space. And unfortunately, that we're not built that, yes, the school system is not built to be able to provide that. But if I am ever involved and I'm writing a report for a family and I'm talking to a school, one of the messages that we'll always put in there is to pick your battles with children, right? You have to, as educators, as parents, we have to pick our battles. And if you see that a child is having difficulty of controlling their body, I don't think the strategy is to punish them. It is to understand that you might be asking them to do something that is beyond their capacity to control. I'll give you an example. When your girls were young and they had to go wash their hands, what did you have in the washroom? You might have a stool for them to step on to reach the faucet. You didn't get upset to them because they couldn't reach the faucet because you understood that there was a physical limitation. The same is true of misbehavior. We often see misbehavior and assume that the child is choosing to misbehave, when in reality, how do we provide a stepping stool for them to be able to navigate their demands? And that might be providing opportunities for exercise, allowing them to stand up in class and rock a little bit more or sit on a specific chair and swivel without getting them into trouble.
Yeah. Right? It's funny. I have clients right now that they have twin boys, and it's like, they're smart kids stuff too, but their behavior was just like, they have so much energy. Like it's to the point at night, like the mom's like, I'm going nuts here. The kids rock the bed. And it's like, and they rock themselves to sleep because they have so much energy. She goes, I don't even know what to do. Like I let them play, but they're like, it gets to the point where they have to get that energy out. And they're twins. And so they feed off each other.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, you might have some problems coming up.
Well, you know what?
Here's my buddy Ed's card.
Yeah, well, you know what? I think that's what I would say to a family like that is that you do what's best for you as a family. right? If you end up having your children stay up later, and they're maybe playing more, and other family members are saying you shouldn't do that, you know what? You're doing the best you can with the reality that you have in front of you. And I think in many ways that is up to the family to decide what is best for them and what is best for the kids. And sometimes it's not going to be exactly the same as how you were raised or how other people raise their children, and that's fine. When I'm working with families like that, all I'm working on is being able to get them to accept the choices that they're making and try to be kind to themselves so that they're not beating themselves up when their children are having a meltdown in front of others, right?
Well, that's the thing I would emphasize that as well. Is like when we had kids too, like there was no playbook that you have to do this or have to do that. It's everybody's cultural. And they'll try to put their own, standards with how they raise kids. And then everyone's going to tell you in the world how to raise your kids. You just got to kind of block that out and do talk with your partner, figure out what's the best for your family,
100%.
like what makes sense, and don't listen to the noise.
Yeah.
Don't listen. It's very hard. Like we all had struggles, like more from my family, I would say than Natalie's family, about how you should raise your kids and what you should be doing, and what school they should go to, and what church, and all this other stuff. There throughout your life as a parent, you're always going to have people push their own opinions on them, whether you want them or not.
Well, you tell me this, David. Look at your two girls. How different are they?
Oh my God,
right?
night and day.
Same with my boys, right?
Yeah.
They're different. Same environment, but their temperament, what they bring in, part of how they're wired is different. So you can't have similar strategies. Sometimes you're going to have to switch strategies. Yeah. You're going to have to try different things because each unique child brings their own unique strengths and areas of struggle, right?
Yeah. Well, look at even our family. Look at our siblings.
Yeah.
Well, you and your sister are more similar, which is great. But I know your brothers and stuff. Yeah. Your two brothers are way different compared. And if you look at my brothers, we're all off. My mom says, I don't even know where you guys came from, And we used to joke and say, well, he's from the bread man, he's from the milk man, because we all look different and we all look different. But it's true. We all grew up in the same environment, but we're all very different, right? That's I learned much different than my brother. When we were in high school, for example, my brother would have to come home and he would, I think he's talked too much throughout the day, but that's a different story.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, he talks more than me. But my mom would come in. She was like, your brother's been studying upstairs till 9:00. I'm like, and you're downstairs playing video games.
Yep.
And I'm like, yeah, we learn differently.
Yep.
It was just the environment. We learn differently. We do things differently. And I think we have to embrace that as well, because that'll allow a lot less stress, right?
100%.
So you deal with mostly the children. What does your sister deal with more of adults?
She works with adolescents and mostly adults. One of the other things I will do is parenting. One of my passions is doing parenting work, which that has changed as I am a parent, right? As I am a parent and I face some of the struggles, it has allowed me to sort of shift in how I work with parents. But my sister mostly does adult work. Yeah.
Maybe I need to talk to her about my mom. Well, it's funny with adult children, there's always struggles and stuff with our family dynamics stuff 100%. Too. So even somebody do you have people come in, they're just set in their ways, and they're obviously you have people set in their ways. And I would always say therapy is there for people that actually want change. You can't go into a therapy session and refuse to change.
Well, I would say that there's sometimes there are roles for the therapist to play to try to get you to see why you might want change. And so, for example, sometimes we don't really reflect on where we're at in life and how it compares to where we want to be. And sometimes with a therapist, they could sort of help you to start to look at that question, what would I want in terms of my life? If I could design my life to be more fulfilling, what would it include more of or less of? And sometimes we believe that we can't change that. Whereas a therapist, we might start to challenge that and to explore the how can we empower you to actually start to design your life in a way that is more effective for you.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
And sometimes people won't know that at the initial stages. They might think that they're not motivated until a therapist helps to sort of help you to see it from a different perspective, right?
Yeah. So for you to actually get clients, do they need to be referred from somebody, or can they just call EPS and say, hey, I want to come make an appointment to get an assessment?
Yeah, good question. And I think that speaks to a little bit of how difficult it is to navigate the mental health field. For psychologists, we are not covered by OHIP. And so we do not need referrals. So people can self-refer. They can call us up and look for services. Usually people are using extended health benefits for services with us. The one caveat I will say is that some insurance companies will only reimburse if you have a referral from a doctor. But that's not our standard. That's more of an insurance company telling you that that's what you need to do.
So you just go see your family doctor, say, hey, I need
exactly.
this. Yeah.
Exactly.
Which makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So throughout your career now, 7 years, what would you say were yours and Alma's like big victories? Like there's got to be some small ones, some big ones. What would you say? Like, what would you both step back and say, good job?
Yeah, I would say two things come to mind. One is we originally wanted to start off and become a mental health hub in Etobicoke. And I do think in the 7 years that we've been open, 7.5 years, I think we have started to be recognized. We have been able to build relationships with community mental health agencies, schools, family doctors. And so I think just knowing that we've become a place that people trust is really something that's important. And the second one I would say is I have a passion for educating and training. And so we've also become a hub for earlier career sort of psychologists to come and do training with us. That does two things. One, it helps to build skill in clinicians. And two, it also allows us to offer a lower cost sliding scale for our clientele so that they can come and, still get quality services under the supervision of a psychologist. That's amazing. I say those were the two main things.
That's pretty cool. I love the fact that too, somebody could just call you and just say, hey, like I need an assessment. I'm not feeling great, because during the pandemic, we had friends and family, close by, were like, we couldn't get in anywhere. We didn't even know where to turn.
Yeah.
And I find that was just like, it felt like hopeless, right? At that point, like, especially during the pandemic, I don't know how you guys felt. Like we were boxed in all the time. We were drinking more than we were supposed to do. I couldn't work out the gym that I wanted to. Like, sure, you had a Peloton, but you don't get the physical. It was one of those things that just your usual ways to relieve stress just weren't there. So having access to somebody like yourself is like, it's immeasurable in my opinion. It's invaluable. Yeah, I think so. Appreciate that from you guys. And you guys have come such a long way, and I'm still working with them. Hopefully we're getting another property soon for you guys. We're working on property.
That. It's been a long haul, but yeah.
So where do you see the best? So you've hit these milestones. Where do you see the business heading in the future?
Yeah, so I would say, we continue to expand our connections in Etobicoke. We are possibly moving to another location, hopefully. And I think anytime you move, there's some challenges with that, but also new opportunities, right? To make new connections in the sort of neighborhood that you move into. I would say that the next real focus for us will be to grow in Vaughan. I think in Vaughan, it's been harder to sort of make connections. I've been trying and I will continue to try. And I think as we make more connections, again, I would say growth is going to come in Vaughan more so over the next year or so.
Is there any challenges between the municipalities between the Vaughan and Toronto that would help?
It's been interesting, David. It's been interesting. Like, when we have obviously people behind the scenes who look at like, internet sort of searches and there is a difference in how people search mental health in Toronto versus Vaughan, which is really interesting to us. We didn't anticipate that.
Yeah.
So for example, in
Etobicoke, my head is hurting. What do I do?
Listen,
that's my Italian. I'm not very good at very good at being Italian.
That you're Italian. But I would say that in Etobicoke, people will use more technical language. So they will look for clinical psychologists. They will use like technical language, where in Vaughan, it's more about counseling. It's more about the language that they use is different. And so I think it basically would suggest that maybe some more education needs to occur in the Vaughan location as to what we provide and why we provide unique services.
Yeah. And if in case you are living in Vaughan, like your access to that property is pretty close, right off of Pine Valley and Highway 7. It's such a good access. That's one of the reasons why we chose. I think you're like
free parking.
And it was really nice. But I would obviously, just even if you're living in Vaughan and you're close to, if you live in Vaughan, you want to know how to access you. That's prime example. EPS is great. We're not finished the interview yet. I'm not getting rid of you just yet. But yeah, I think we start wrapping up fairly soon, but I find that these trends are just, especially for mental health, I think for males, are you finding that since the pandemic, you kind of alluded to a little bit before the pandemic, were men as well, even able to open up, or is there any avenues, or do you find most of your I guess more for your sister, I would say, because like I said, children don't really have a choice, but for the adults, do you find it was more predominantly women that were coming as opposed to now? Would that be another trend?
I would say that yes, I would say that we are seeing more males We're also, just one thing I want to clarify that I think it's going to hit back to something you said earlier. What we're seeing a spike in is questions about ADHD, questions about autism, those type of things in adults. People who have potentially been missed, right? And who are now noticing that as demands go up, they're starting to struggle more and more in terms of keeping up and juggling. Yeah. So we're seeing a spike in that. I would say that, yes, we're seeing more males. I think the idea of like opening up, I think it's more individual. It's hard for me to give like a global like trend there. Some men come in and they're willing and they're quite experienced with mental health services, and they know, what's expected, and they're quite open right from the beginning. I think with any client, even, whether it's a child, a woman or a male, is you always have to build trust, right? Everything about trust, right? 100%. Like in your business, trust is so important, right?
Well, in my business, most people come to me they don't have any trust. They've had so many bad relationships. I have to build it from scratch. And I'm like, okay, here's how I'm different. And I try to explain. I had one member, like we had the cigar party, and he came and he goes, he went through like 3 or 4 bad realtors, and it was like he had battered wife syndrome. It feels like that. And it was like, and he was like, so he actually said, he goes, oh my God, you actually do care. I'm like, you're not just a number to me. Like you've never been a number to me. Even though I've said it, I'm like, I bring them into the family. You get to meet my kids. You get to see the house. I bring you to parties. I try to, for your birthday, I try to instill the trust. It's like, you're not just a number, but that takes time, right?
But that's why you have repeat customers, right?
Yeah.
And that's why people come back to you, because they have encountered you and interacted with you, and they trust you. The same is true of a therapist. When you come into a therapy room, it's our job for you during that first session. Like, think about it. Therapy is basically one of the most significant places where you're going to feel vulnerable, right? And so when you're vulnerable, of course, walls go up. And so in many ways, it's our job to be able to build trust as quickly as possible, so that you can start to see that we're there to support you. And that sometimes with males takes a little bit longer, but that's our job, right? Our job is to try to get you to see the benefit of coming in.
This is such an awesome talk, eh? Like, this is so good. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up. I know we get to that point. So the last question I had on here too, any words of advice for those looking to start either in any type of business, because this is not traditionally a business you hear people starting, right? So especially they're going to face challenges.
Yeah.
Like, how would you tell them to start?
Well, it's interesting. I don't know how much of a brain I have for business. I would say the one thing is to have somebody who's going to temper, like, decision making and where you're going to go. Like, my sister serves as that. Like, I often have the ideas and like, why don't we do this? And she's always like, yeah, So in some ways, I think it's thinking through what you want, what you envision for yourself, and then starting to highlight what the barriers are, and trying to figure out how you can start to circumvent or figure ways around those barriers. For me, in the mental health business, what I would say is don't be in a rush. I think a lot of clinics, and there are clinics who have grown like really quickly, but in many ways, there's a lot of business to go around. Yeah. And I think people often get caught up in, I need to be this big, I need to have this space. And I think, be patient, it will come. And as long as you're doing good work and people are going to want to come to see you, right?
Yeah. So just kind of stay in your lines. Do have a vision, but stay in your lines. Yeah. Don't try to get
and not be afraid to seek out external support and guidance when needed, because we have our area of expertise, but that's why we bring in David. That's why we bring in our sort of social media staff. That this is why we bring people to guide us in areas that are not our areas of expertise, right?
Yeah, that's huge for entrepreneurs. I think the biggest problem with entrepreneurs they do is they try to do everything themselves, and you're like, no, like the smartest person in the room is knowing you're not the smartest person in the room. Bring other smart people in there to help you.
100%.
And that's the idea. You exemplified that. So if people want to reach out, find you, whether it's social media, online, what's the best way for them to find you?
Yep, we have an Instagram, Etobicoke Psych, at Etobicoke Psych, or at EPS Family Health. I keep getting thinking about our previous name, at EPS Family Health, but our website is at etobicokepsych.com. You could send us an email. I'm readily available on Instagram. People will send me messages all the time, and I'm constantly having conversations behind the scenes, whether I'm guiding them as to where they can go for help, or whether they're connecting with our clinic.
You're fighting with me about vaccines,
or we're having discussions about different opinions on matters, right? Yeah. So
this has been awesome, man. We really thank you so much. I hope my audience really got a lot. I got a lot of this conversation as well. So guys, as we said before, we're just wrapping up. We really appreciate you watching, following along. Please make some comments if you're watching this on YouTube or Instagram. Follow along with me as well on all the channels which you've seen before. We are wrapping up this last episode, but we'll see you next week. So stay tuned. And again, give us any ideas. If you want me to interview somebody or you want me to talk about certain topics, put those in the chat as well. Thanks, guys. Bye for now.